Howdy doody folks, and welcome back to my journey across the United States, where every state has a story, and Texas. We're going to talk about how weird you are for a second time. Writing this, I just heard about everything from a Bigfoot that steals your girl to your own personal and very Texan headless horseman. I'm very excited to share these stories with y'all, and clearly, you don't do boring. Now, before we jump into these stories, I have a quick favor to ask of you. If you enjoy these stories about America's strangest tales, dropping a comment and a like and hitting that subscribe button, like it called Jim Bowie will help me out more than anything as I make my way towards 100,000 subscribers in 2025. This will never cost you a dime, and it's a quick way to say, hey YouTube, this guy's alright. Anyways, with that, let's get into Texas's weird lore once again. You know, it's not every day a cryptid story makes me pause, stroke my chin, and say, okay, this might not be complete nonsense, but the story of the Bear King of Marble Falls actually comes pretty darn close. It's weird, it's unsettling, it's oddly consistent, and just plausible enough to make you question if maybe, just maybe, someone in Texas saw something a little more akin to Bigfoot than you might imagine exists in the region. So the legend officially kicks off in 1901, but the backstory goes back way further. According to folklore, and okay, a very shaky grasp of oral tradition, the Kickapoo people, sometimes spelled the Kickatoo people, were the first to whisper stories of a half-man, half-bear creature roaming the region. Also, for reference, the Kickapoo didn't originate in Texas. They were originally from the Great Lakes region. Like many other groups, the U.S. government eventually forced to relocate. They moved to Texas, Missouri, and Kansas in two big waves. Once when the King of Spain said mi casa su casa and gave them some of their land in the West, and again in the 1830s when Andrew Jackson decided treaties were more like guidelines. Somewhere along the way, after they arrived in Texas, modern legend says they started telling stories of a mysterious bear man, who didn't just live among the local bears, he ruled them. Now, full disclosure, a lot of supposed native legends from this period were later exposed as being invented by white dudes like me that were trying to spice up local tourism pamphlets. But for now, let's give this one a pass, because I haven't been able to debunk this story yet, and I believe in innocence until proven guilty, and personally, I couldn't find any guilt. Anyways, this is the story of the so-called Bear King. It's 1901. The sun is high, the sheep are bleating, and a young woman named Rami Arland is just out here doing her chores. If you buy the stories, every man in this then small town apparently wanted to marry her, which probably meant she was relatively popular, and a story of her disappearance would spread across the town like wildfire. Suddenly, amidst her chores, there was a scream. A real scream, not a I saw a spider kind of scream, but the a monster is about to yeet me into the wilderness kind of scream. Her family, being appropriately Western, immediately grabbed their rifles and ran towards the ruckus. But when they got to the pen where the sheep were kept, Rami was gone. Also, it was pretty weird. There was no blood, there was no fur, no typical signs of a struggle one would associate with an attack from local wildlife like bears or mountain lions. Just one seriously confused flock of sheep and some funky mountain lion-esque screams echoing across the land. Now, most folks assumed she'd been taken by a cougar, the animal, not a divorcee named Linda, no offense Linda, and they mourned accordingly. Well, to be fair, they did send out a hunting party, but they basically couldn't find any sign of Rami. That is until Rami came strolling out of the woods later that day, looking like she'd just finished an escape room, because she probably did. And this, of course, is where the story goes a bit off the rails. Rami told her family she was out with the sheep when a large black bear appeared, but before she could even scream, "Winnie the what?" the bear ran away, spooked by something even more terrifying behind it. Here enters the Bear King. According to Rami, this creature was both man and beast, hairy, hulking, smelly, and strong enough to toss her over his shoulder like a sack of potatoes. She said it made a terrible noise and then bolted off into what she called the mountains. Also, quick geography note, from what I can tell, there are no mountains near Marble Falls, Texas. There are hills, there are some caves, but unless you're 3 whiskeys in, there are no moon mountains, as she called them. Regardless, the creature carried her to a nearby cave, possibly today's Longhorn Cavern State Park, which is the nearest cave to Marble Falls from what I can tell. And here things got awkward. Ramey said anytime she tried to leave, the Bear King, which she thought looked kinda human, would smack her, just give her a warning slap like a nightclub bouncer. Eventually, she stopped resisting, assuming she had little time left on this earth, and she laid down in the corner like a woman who just accepted her new role in a very hairy rom-com. I've seen a B-movie about this, I think. And that's when the Bear King apparently let his guard down, and he passed out fast asleep on the cold floor of the cave. Ramey, channeling her inner Nancy Drew, would tiptoe out of the cave then, wandering through the woods, and finally ran into a hunter, who brought her home and probably had a very uncomfortable ride back listening to her story. Once she was home, Ramey pointed a finger towards the Moon Mountains. Again, they're still not real, and a hunting party was formed. They ventured into the woods like angry villagers from Beauty and the Beast, ready to take down whatever the heck tried to make their hometown sweetheart the bride of Sasquatch. Sure enough, they found him too. Accounts say they came upon the Bear King and were weirdly hesitant to shoot, not because he was cute or good at doing their taxes or anything, but because, by their own admission, he might have been human. Things escalated when the creature began grinding its teeth, though, and pounding its chest and screaming like a woman, which, fun fact, is also the mating call this guy I knew in college named Bruce did. I know you watched this, Bruce. I remember what happened at the Hill Bar and Grill. Eventually, the beast charged, and like any good Texan armed with a rifle and a moral dilemma, they shot first and left the philosophical questions for later. Also, I'm just joking, I probably would have done the same thing if approached by a beast like this. And that's kind of it. According to records, the Bear Man was put down, and beyond this, there are no more records of what happened to it, or its body, or any photographs or anything. It's just pretty clear they left him there or something and decided never to speak of this again. So anyways, let's ask, was this real? Well, let's address the obvious. There are some problems with the story. First, the specific knowledge Ramey had of Kickapoo folklore, aka of the Bear King, is sort of suspicious. When she saw this thing in the actual stories, she doesn't say it was a bear man, she says it was a Bear King, or the Kickapoo Bear King. She, knew of the local folklore of the locals. I just find this weird, and she was never really linked to the tribe in any way, so it's a little bit convenient. Second, as I've gone through, the mention of the Moon Mountains that don't exist is kind of strange, unless we're talking about metaphorical mountains, like mountains of trauma from being abducted by Bigfoot. But, and this is a big, hairy Bigfoot-sized but, the behavior described does line up with known primate aggression displays. Teeth grinding, chest beating, kidnapping. These are all things that have been observed in gorillas, chimps, and Bruce during March Madness. I didn't forget that either, Bruce. And there are eerily similar stories from around the country about wild men, or Bigfoot-like creatures, snatching women, though I'll admit they can be similarly dubious. So, who knows, maybe it was a rogue gorilla, maybe it was a man raised by bears, or maybe, just maybe, this was Texas's own backwoods Beauty and the Beast with fewer singing cups and a few more concussions. And one final note, if you're ever in Marble Falls, there is a brewery named after the Bear King that I will be paying a visit to when I get down there, and that tells you how cool this story really is. Though if nothing else, that should be enough to raise your glass to one of the weirdest, possibly real, but definitely hairy tales in Texas's folklore. On June 18th of 1953, the Houston Chronicle published a story that sounds a little less like a news article and a little more like the plot of a low-budget sci-fi horror flick. Unearthly Batman terrifies watchers. According to the piece, something downright bizarre had gone down in the Houston Heights neighborhood. A winged humanoid apparently decided to take up residence in a pecan tree, like some sort of hellish fruit bat. It all went down at about 2:30 in the morning, which is about the right time for interdimensional terror, in my opinion. The Batman in question was described as an unearthly figure of a man with wings, perched in a pecan tree located in the front yard of 118 East 3rd Street. And this wasn't your run-of-the-mill guy dressed as a bat hanging in a tree situations. No, this thing was reportedly surrounded by a glowing yellow light, a detail that many have suggested might actually make this creature more angel than Batman, although it might have also just been the streetlight. The witnesses of this strange supposed Batman included Miss Hilda Walker, a 23-year-old housewife, Judy Meyer, a 14-year-old girl, and Howard Phillips, a 33-year-old tool plant inspector, all of whom were sitting on the front porch trying to escape the oppressive Texas heat. According to them, it was very hot, so we were sitting on the porch, which might just be the most Houston preface to supernatural trauma I've ever heard. Because of course, when the devil's thermostat is cranked to boil, the only logical place to wait it out is on the porch. At first, the trio thought they were seeing the shadow of a moth. Granted, one that happened to be casting its silhouette just right in the branches of a tree. But then someone realized, hey, wait a minute, this moth appears to have arms and legs and is possibly wearing a unitard. That's when things escalated. Mr. Phillips gave a pretty vivid description. He said the figure looked like it was wearing a tight-fitting uniform, sort of like that of a paratrooper, and was surrounded by a glowing halo of light. Of course, once they noticed it, in proper moth fashion, the trio couldn't take their eyes off of it. That is, until suddenly the yellow light surrounding it supposedly slowly faded away, and with the light, the creature disappeared too, causing the 14-year-old Judy Meyer to scream in terror, which is sort of a funny reaction to the scary thing going away rather than after noticing it in the first place. But it wasn't over yet. Just moments later, they reportedly heard a loud swooshing noise, and then a white flash zipped across the rooftops. They claimed to see a torpedo-shaped object flying over the houses, which means that this Batman possibly made his escape in an interdimensional vibrator. Okay, maybe that's dirty. And then there was nothing. There was no follow-up, no crashing through a window, no more sitting in trees, no crime fighting, no nothing. Just the eerie return to Houston normalcy, which if you've ever been there in the summer, probably just means more humidity, sweat, mosquitoes, and traffic, among other notably more positive variables. Now, following the event, Mr. Phillips would remark not that he'd seen a cryptid, but that he had previously thought these folks seeing UFOs were crazy. But as it turns out, now he thought he'd seen one himself. I suppose the torpedo-shaped object would indeed elicit imagery of this little Batman dude flying off in a craft. And funny enough, this actually reminds me quite a bit of the Bat People described in the Great Moon Hoax of 1835, a series of articles published by The Sun, a New York newspaper that claimed folks had discovered a civilization on the moon, going so far as to say John Herschel, a British astronomer, was the one that came across it. In short, I find it interesting that throughout history we've mixed up bats and people more than our fair share of times when imagining extraterrestrial beings. So with this story in mind, let's put on our skeptic hats and dive into the credence surrounding the story and, assuming the story was true, who or what this Batman could have been. Alright, to start, I've got to be a party pooper, and I have to say, I looked high and low for census records of these three witnesses, Miss Hilda Walker, Judy Meyer, and Mr. Howard Phillips in Houston, and I couldn't find a peep about them anywhere in the area. And let's be honest, newspapers back then weren't exactly known for their restraint. Hoaxes and tall tales sold papers, and Winged Man Terrifies Porch Sitters is one heck of a headline. Even in the 1970s, the local press in Robstown, Texas, was still printing stories about owl witches dive-bombing people, although I can't really debunk that story too hard because the viewers of my last Texas video claimed they'd seen La Lechuza themselves in Robstown during that saga. So, you never really know, and maybe I should give Texas weirdness more of a fair shake. That being said, when you read what else Houston was up to around this time, this story does get a little weird, and arguably more pantless. See, around the time this episode occurred, in May and June of 1953, there were multiple reports of a man attacking women around Houston. This guy would yank women from cars, shove them over, and afterwards he would vanish without a trace. Police, though they did pursue him, could never catch him. He moved really quick, almost supernaturally quick, and some say he reminded them of Houston's own little spring-heeled Jack, the legendary Victorian menace known for terrorizing London with superhuman jumps and general mischief. And get this, on May 7th, just a month before the Batman sighting, this mystery man was seen hiding in a tree. Yep, in the evening, waiting and watching a woman. The attacks kept happening too. They were always elusive and always kind of weird. And then finally, on May 6th of 1954, the authorities arrested a man. It turns out it was the superintendent of a Houston hospital, and when they found him, he was wandering the streets of Houston after bothering a woman in nothing but underwear, boxers, and bad intentions. He was actually arrested for indecent exposure this day, and while he denied being the infamous man who'd been seen in trees, wouldn't you know it, the attacks and sightings of the man in trees stopped immediately after this arrest. Coincidence? You tell me. Of course, nobody ever said this guy glowed or flew around in a glowing torpedo, but if your neighborhood was full of stories about a glowing man in a tree, and then a few weeks later they arrested a half-naked dude, and nobody was in trees anymore, let's just say the Venn diagram is suspiciously close to a circle. So what was the Houston Batman then? A cryptid? A visitor from the stars? A myth born from a combo of hysteria, heatstroke, and Houston's unofficial but tempting summer dress code of just underwear? Or maybe he was a real, very confused hospital superintendent with a flair for public nudity and tree climbing. Personally, I think there's something oddly compelling about how well the timeline adds up with the real spring-heeled Jack of Houston. But that glowing halo, the torpedo vibrator craft, that sounds like the part of the story where the myth outgrows the man. Maybe the original reports of a creep in a tree evolved into something more dramatic, more marketable, something with wings and something that sells papers. Or maybe the Batman really did exist, and he was just a very shy alien looking for a tree to vibe in. Either way, you tell me, was Houston visited by a winged cryptid, a flying saucer pilot, or just a deeply misunderstood, mostly nude hospital exec who loved trees a little too much? Drop your thoughts in the comments, but please keep your pants on. If you go digging through old documents in Texas, you'll find a strange piece of legislation, a House Concurrent Resolution, HCR number 134, that starts with, "Whereas Texas is renowned for its innovative cuisine, and certain beloved dishes have become integral elements of the state's culture and folklore, one such food is chicken fried steak, and the epic deliciousness of this specialty has inspired not only countless satisfied diners, but also an enduring Lone Star legend," and ends with, "Resolved that the 82nd Legislature of the state of Texas hereby declares La Mesa the legendary home of the chicken fried steak." Now, if you want to dig into why a bona fide piece of legal literature is making such a definitive assertion, we've got to jump into the legend surrounding it. See, for a very long time, folks pondered the invention of chicken fried steak. Seriously, there was an episode of Unsolved Mysteries about it, Season 3, Episode 7, The Chicken Fried Steak Mystery. Okay, I'm lying about that. But regardless, folks didn't really know where it came from. However, according to the reports, it all came to light when in 1976, a man named Larry Basaw published an article explaining the origin of this dish. In short, they say in 1911, one Jimmy Don Perkins, a short-order cook at Ethel's Home Cooking in La Mesa, misread or misheard the order for chicken and fried steak, and therefore took a piece of steak, dipped it in milk and flour, like you would to fry a piece of chicken, and served it with french fries and gravy over top. Now, some might have observed this as a culinary abomination, but the man that ordered it would hesitantly bite into it and realize this was exactly what he was missing in life. From this moment forward, chicken fried steak, it's said, was a menu item at Ethel's and in many kitchens the nation across. Now, as for whether this story is actually true, well, sadly, and despite the fact that La Mesa celebrates the story annually, the story is in fact made up, and was written by one Larry Basaw, a man who was a columnist for the Austin American-Statesman back in the day. He wrote the story, and like a proper tall tale, it was ridiculous, but just reasonable enough that folks thought, hey, this might just be true. The folklore, of course, spread like wildfire, and before long, national news outlets were spreading the tale as well, claiming that Larry had uncovered the origin of chicken fried steak. Because of this, the town of La Mesa has really latched onto this ridiculous, but ever so believable tall tale and heralds the story as true, and to this day refers to itself as the legendary home of the chicken fried steak. Thus, every April, they host the annual Chicken Fried Steak Festival, which is kinda just a typical festival. My cousin has actually run the 5K they host there. But of course, the pièce de résistance of the festival is their annual chicken fried steak cook-off, an event that, as a lover of chicken fried steak myself, I am one day destined to coincide with. Who knows, maybe one day I'll even enter my own recipe for it. Now, this is my first time back in San Antonio since I shot that ghost story video for Texas, where I mistakenly pronounced Bowie like David Bowie instead of the correct Jim Bowie, as in the knife-wielding legend. And to the many of you who pointed that out with the fury of a Texan scorned, yes, you were right and I'm very sorry, and I've repented. But while I was down there enjoying the usual menu of haunted buildings, whispering spirits, and general Tex-Mex spookiness, I stumbled across something a little more infernal. See, back in 1975, if legend is to be believed, San Antonio didn't just host your average ghost or haunted mansion. No, y'all got a visit from Lucifer himself, the devil in the flesh, and apparently he had some serious moves on the dance floor. According to this particular tale, it was Halloween night of 1975, a night already reserved for costumes and questionable decisions. A young man described as both handsome and wearing a white suit, because of course he was in classic fallen angel fashion wearing white, would strut into an old nightclub on Old Highway 90. The name translated into English as the Little Shrimp, which is a charming choice for a venue where Beelzebub allegedly dropped in for a boogie. Once inside, our mystery man apparently started dancing like he was auditioning for Saturday Night Fever, Eternal Damnation Edition. And the local ladies, they noticed. This man had rhythm, swagger, and presumably cologne so strong it made your tongue tingle. One by one, the women were drawn in, hypnotized by his feet, his hips, and probably the fact that he looked like the love child of John Travolta and a bottle of tequila. Regardless, the night wore on, midnight rolled around, and then one woman in particular found herself caught in the dance of seduction, or maybe just exhaustion, and it said she glanced at her watch. That's when she saw it when she was looking down and she screamed. Because the man's shiny shoes, yeah, those were gone, replaced by chicken feet. Big, scaly, sharp-clawed chicken feet, like he stepped out of a KFC deep fryer and onto the dance floor. Other versions said he had hooves, which might mean he's got a cousin up on Donkey Lady Bridge. Either way, the consensus was clear. This man was not just a smooth dancer, he was El Diablo, the devil. Naturally, when someone shouts, "This man has goat hooves," in the middle of a club, the mood shifts really quickly. The devil, now busted, bolted for the men's room like he had to pee after a little too much distilled agave juice. Some say he opened the window and slipped out like a demonic Houdini. Others claimed he vanished into thin sulfuric air right there in the bathroom stall. When a few brave, or perhaps drunk men forced open the door, all they found was smoke and the smell of sulfur, which, depending on who you ask, is either evidence of the Prince of Darkness or just what happens when you eat tacos and drink tequila for 6 hours straight. Now, unlike most of these spooky stories I tell, which are based on legends passed down or ghost tours I've crashed, this one hits closer to home because I actually know someone, well, someone's uncle, who claims to have been there, swears by it. My friend's Hispanic uncle back in Tennessee says he saw it with his own eyes when he lived in San Antonio. The devil, dancing right there, in El Camaroncito, and often on Halloween when we were kids he'd bust out the story after a couple of beers, very child-appropriate, and tell us about the night Beelzebub two-stepped his way through San Antonio. Now I always figured this story was equal parts snake and oil, but then again, half of the internet says they were there too, because of course they do. Thing is, the details get fuzzy depending on who's telling it. Some say it happened in 1979, not 1975. Some swap Halloween for Good Friday, which that year just also so happened to fall on Friday the 13th, because nothing screams guilty Catholic like sneaking out to a nightclub on Good Friday and accidentally hooking up with Satan. Sometimes it's a prom instead of a club. Sometimes it's not El Camaroncito, but Club Boccaccio in McAllen, Texas, a hotspot once known for staging over-the-top pranks and pulling in the crowds with stunts that made punk to look like a church picnic. And nowadays, that club is a shopping center on North 10th Street, so if you're hunting demons, I guess you'll have to check between the Cinnabon and the Payless shoe store. The thing is, though, this dancing devil story didn't just pop up out of nowhere. It's actually an amalgamation of much older South Texas folklore. See, according to folklorist Mark Glazer, stories like this were already circulating decades ago, often revolving around rebellious young women sneaking out and dancing. Oh, what horror. And they would wind up face to face with Satan himself. Basically, if you were a woman and you disobeyed your parents, wore a skirt, and so much as wiggled your hips, you're one dance away from eternal damnation. Pretty subtle, right? Then there's Jose Eduardo Limon, a scholar who returned to his home region at the borderlands of Texas and collected dozens of these devils at the dance stories. He theorized they were a reaction to the cultural upheaval in South Texas, especially the post-Chicano movement, when women's roles started to shift and the old guard got nervous. So what do? They invent a story that says, you want to be independent? You want to wear heels and shake a little? Well, guess what? The devil's gonna eat your soul. It's a morality tale, wrapped up in polyester and doused in Aquanet, and it's been around in some form or another for hundreds of years, likely blending Catholic dread, indigenous traditions, and a touch of sweaty dancehall panic. It teaches one basic lesson. If you're a young woman in Texas and you dare go out without parental approval, you might just end up slow dancing with Satan himself. Now, do I agree with this lesson? Heck no. But it's clear the story wasn't just meant to scare the kids. It was also a way to reinforce certain social expectations, especially for young women, and over time the setting just updated itself. First it was the village fiesta, and now it's the discoteca. I'm not even kidding. Same message, different soundtrack. So next time you find yourself in a Texas nightclub and some too-good-to-be-true stranger asks you to dance, check his feet. You never know. He might be wearing chicken claws, or perhaps worse, Crocs. It was 2002, and Bill Vail, then a NASA subcontractor's operations quality manager, had just had his life drop-kicked by a divorce. In the wake of this emotional strife, Bill did what a lot of folks in his shoes might do. He ditched his high-stress career, moved back to Arlington, Texas to be closer to his brother Bob, and started over. You don't necessarily get the sense Bill was looking to find himself or eat, pray, love through Bali. No, Bill wanted to lay low, be close to family, grill some meat, work a regular job, and not have his world rocked again. So he picked up a modest, unremarkable home, I mean this lovingly given what happens next, and snagged a job at a local water purification company, where Bob, his brother, eventually joined him. From all accounts, Bill was the human equivalent of a dependable pair of khakis. He was quiet, he was punctual, he was hardworking, and tragically, it would be this punctuality that would betray him. One day, Bill got a call from dispatch with an oddball request. A customer wanted him to show up exactly at 5 p.m., not 4:59, not 5:01, 5, on the dot. Now, most of us would be like, okay, pal, calm down, I'll show up when I can show up. But Bill's the guy who shows up on time because the schedule says so. So at 5 p.m. sharp, he pulls up to the house, and immediately he hears screaming. Like real screaming, not kids watching a horror movie screaming. More like somebody's about to toss holy water and flip a coffee table screaming. But Bill, braver than the rest of us, walked up to the doorway anyways. He heard a woman's voice yelling, "In the name of Christ, I command you to leave these men." And instead of noping out, he rang the doorbell. Bless him. And then he knocked, which would crack open the door, and he saw a woman standing there, glaring. And behind her, 3 grown men on their knees, like they were being scolded by God's most terrifying PTA meeting. Upon seeing this, Bill peaced out, called his boss, and said something to the effect of, "Sir, I will not be returning to this house as these folks were quite creepy." And for the rest of the night, my impression is that Bill thought little of this. That is, until he got home and laid in bed. And then in the middle of the night, he would experience something. That night, Bill's lying in bed when suddenly the whole bed, or maybe the whole home, started rattling, like violently. He thought, I guess this is an earthquake. But again, this is Texas, not Tokyo. He Googled this the next morning, as one did in 2002 with Patience of a Saint and a dial-up modem, and he found no report of an earthquake. Then outside, there were doves. Tons of doves filling the trees, cooing like a heavenly infestation. Kind of biblical. Doves were used as a sacrifice in place of a lamb in the Old Testament a couple of times after all, weren't they? Things then started to escalate. The smells would come next. First, it smelled like bacon in his house, which was kind of weird and pervasive, but I guess kind of cool. But then it started to smell like feces, like poop, which is less cool. And then of course, it started to smell like sulfur, because what haunting is complete without some eau de brimstone? Bill's home turned into a paranormal scratch and sniff sticker from hell. But wait, there's more. At night, Bill started feeling things that were scurrying under his bed. Things brushing his feet, tiny little hands pushing up from the mattress. That's a no from me, dog. Also, speaking of dogs, he had dogs, and his dogs were freaking out too, barking at invisible midnight invaders. One night, while watching TV, a water bottle apparently yeeted across the kitchen too. And according to most of the sources I've read, apparently this water bottle incident is where Bill was like, oh shoot, there's actually something going on here. And I agree, that's pretty gnarly. But can we be real? If these demons are so powerful, so menacing, wouldn't they, do something other than throwing a flipping water bottle? Same thing with ghosts. The little buggers are always yanking on clothes ever so slightly and scooting a door a fraction of a centimeter as the evidence they provide. Hot take, ghosts are the weakest things in the world if they exist, and we could all totally beat one up in a fight. Regardless, at this point, Bill realized this wasn't just like a raccoon infestation in his house. There was something supernatural going on, according to him. Soon, this would translate to dark shapes on the wall and creepy electrical glitches. In one episode, according to Bill, his phone started aggressively butt dialing people at like 3 a.m., like a drunk ex. This phone issue would actually prompt one of the better-known events in this whole saga, Bill's infamous chat with a representative from his phone company. Apparently, if you buy the stories, while Bill was talking to a phone company representative, they would both start hearing some sort of weird language being spoken in the background. Here's actually my dramatic reenactment of the phone call for you.
Hi, what are you saying? Do you want to, upgrade your data plan? Do you want to add the premium hotspot package? If you sign up for cable, you can get 2 months of Paramount Minus for free. Is there anything else I can do for you, sir?
This happened more than once too, even during a call with Bill's buddy, who was a sound engineer, who also apparently heard this and had no explanation. Bill tried to record it, but came up empty. Classic. Now, this part, it's kinda comedy gold. Bill would also apparently make the hilarious and sort of strange request of his family to stand in his closet, and once they exited, to let Bill know if they saw anything. Of course, at first his family would deny seeing anything in the closet, probably thinking, "Dear God, it's 2 p.m. on a Saturday. Why am I in Bill's closet when I could be taking my lawnmower through a car wash instead?" But after some prodding, it turned out they and Bill saw the same strange thing in there. Imp-like creatures. You know, the little kind of reptilian, little devilish dudes that hang out with witches and old art pieces? Yeah, apparently those little buggers were the ones hanging out in Bill's home. Trust me though, just like ghosts, these guys are weak AF. I had one as a pet back in vanilla World of Warcraft in 2013, and that guy couldn't do anything. Bob, Bill's brother, would also experience other weirdness in the home, ranging from hearing strange noises to seeing creatures moving around in his peripheral vision. All things that are not necessarily paranormal, but are understandably unsettling. Admittedly, after this, Bill would sort of not do anything. And to be clear, what can he do? It's not like they offer technical degrees in how to remove imps from homes, but Bill refused to move out, as if that'd help anyways, as he wasn't going to wimp out to some measly little demons. And therefore, these little guys would supposedly pester him all night long, doing everything from smacking him all night to sliding into bed next to him like his own 7 circles of hell variety of a booty call. Of course, when you're suffering like this, and imps are trying to get all cozy with you at night, there's only one group you can call. Well, not the Ghostbusters, I guess. He actually called a group named Did You See That? A name that sounds less like a paranormal team and more like a drunken bowling league. They're supposedly scientific and rational, and they first gained attention through videos posted on, wait for it, MySpace. Yeah, we're deep in early internet lore here. Anyways, Did You See That checked the place for logical explanations. Rodents, drafts, faulty wiring, a weird lanky guy living in the walls. Nothing would pan out though, so they came back again and again and again, and over time they started experiencing the same stuff. Batteries draining, equipment getting tossed, and even spotting a ghost cat. Then of course came Melissa. She's the friend of a friend's wife and a self-proclaimed medium. And if there's one thing I'm suspicious of, it's mediums. Don't get me wrong, I'm open to them like everything else, but something rubs me the wrong way about their shtick. It's kind of like, I can see things you can't, I'm special, you're not, pay me. Maybe I'm just offended because I'm not special. Who knows? Regardless, Melissa reported seeing shadowy figures, and yes, more imps, all under the rule of one big boss, the Hat Man. And if you had Hat Man on your bingo card for this episode, well, there you go. You know him, shadowy, tall, possibly a demon, possibly just a very unfriendly cowboy. Regardless, the Hat Man would apparently also become a regular in Bill's ever-growing parade of paranormal nonsense going on in the home. And this Hat Man creature would apparently urge future guests to, quote-unquote, take out Bill for whatever reason, getting to the point that one of these guests would actually threaten Bill with a kitchen knife, which, viewers, for reference, is something you call the cops about, and do not chalk up to supernatural nonsense. Eventually, though, this all went too far for Bill. Bill one night would hear crashing going on throughout his home, like loud crashes, sort of the volume of car crashes, over and over and over, and this would set Bill off to the extent that he'd start screaming at whatever dwelled in his home that he'd had enough. He yelled something to the tune of, "I'm done being picked on, and I'm done putting up with your crap. Hey Jesus, if you'd do me a solid, I'd really appreciate it if you'd come down here and kick this Hat Man's sorry arse." essentially calling upon God and Jesus to give this hat man a taste of some biblical Christ foo. And my impression is, while Bill was clearly absolutely freaked out by this experience, that was that, and his house was cleansed in the most Texas way possible, by Bill going full Southern Baptist mode and screaming about hell and damnation at the hell and damnation. Seriously, I'm not insulting or making fun of him. This is pretty much what he did, and it's pretty metal if you ask me. Go Bill! Now his home was fully cleansed, and my impression is that the home settled down. And to this day, Bill remains spirit-free, although I'm not sure if he remains in this home. Regardless, this episode left a permanent mark on Bill's life. Bill has followed this episode up by studying demonology and ultimately publishing a book called Satanic Warfare: Tactics of the Demonic, which is sort of self-described as a guidebook to fight your own demons. He also started a website, or forum I suppose, UnitedParanormalInternational.ning.com, that was meant to discuss paranormal happenings that supposedly had about 1,600 members. Here, before this website's domain expired in 2021, as far as I can tell, he listed an email and phone number to contact him. And while it doesn't seem like this forum really went anywhere, I've got to admit, it's pretty genuine to put yourself out there for folks you think might be experiencing something you did. So what's my takeaway? Honestly, I'm a paranormal positive kind of person. I want this stuff to be real. I want imp infestations and phone demons and hat-wearing shadow lords to be real, although I also want means to fight these buggers. But I also think we need pretty darn good proof of this stuff if we want to say it's conclusively real. And this story, it's a lot of testimony, mostly from Bill, his friends, and the occasional eccentric MySpace ghoul boys. No real hard evidence, no game-changing records, just an emotionally compelling but very weird experience. That being said, I'll say this, Bill seems like a sweet guy. He hasn't really capitalized on this story with 1 million YouTube followers or 20 ghost hunting tours, and this is something I'm pretty sure he could do with the interest his story has gathered. He only published one modest book, and for me, that earns him a little bit of credibility. So Bill, if you're out there and happen to be watching, I know you sometimes watch YouTube videos about these stories, thanks for telling your story to the public, and I really do want to believe you. If you ever want to sit down and chat, I'd love to disentangle the fact from the fiction and get a really clear view of your story in a modern interpretation. Either way, it's been a pleasure reading your story. Okay, moving on from demons for a second, there's a lot going on with the shape of Texas. It's iconic, it's recognizable, it's the kind of outline you see on t-shirts, belt buckles, tattoos, and questionable tattoos on belt buckles. But if you go all the way to the northwest tip, right where Texas, Oklahoma, and New Mexico all awkwardly touch tips, you'll notice something a little off. See, if you just glance at a map, everything seems pretty normal. Oklahoma's western border runs straight down and should line up cleanly with Texas's western edge, which in turn should form a straight satisfying line with New Mexico's eastern border. You know, something you'd want to trace with a ruler and whisper, nice. But zoom in, and the truth reveals itself like a bad first date. Texas's border will suddenly slink about 2.3 miles west for no obvious reason. It just kind of meanders there. It's like the state had a drunken stumble mid-line and decided, this is good enough. This misstep has been called the worst survey error in U.S. history, and it's not just a few feet we're talking about. We're talking about 942 square miles of land Texas got to keep thanks to a blunder. That's more than the size of Houston, which means Texas got to stay the big guy at the party thanks to one of the laziest measuring jobs since one of my friends in high school decided 5 inches was close enough to 6. Now let's rewind first. Back in 1850, Texas was bigger, like pre-Diet Texas, and it agreed to sell off its northern and western lands to the U.S. government, and eventually much of this land would become New Mexico, in exchange for $10 million, which was a whole lot back then, enough to buy at least some dignity and I assume an ungodly number of spittoons. The new Texas-New Mexico border was supposed to line up with the 103rd meridian, precise, clean, and aligned with Oklahoma's western edge. Simple enough, right? Well, not really actually. Here enters John H. Clark, a government surveyor who, and I cannot stress this enough, absolutely sucked at his job. John was tasked with planting survey markers along the 103rd meridian, and he started like a good boy from the south, working his way north. But then he ran out of access to water and decided, screw this, I'm not dying in the desert for a line, instead of pushing through. Anyways, then he went up north of what's now Dalhart, Texas, and started working down instead. That's like stopping a jigsaw puzzle halfway and deciding the sky goes where the ocean was. Then, somewhere along the way, Texas got into it with some Native American groups. Whether it was a hostile encounter or just the kind of situation that made him soil his surveying pants is unclear. But either way, he noped out and never finished the 70-mile middle stretch between the north and the south lines he was making. So yeah, there's a whole gap in the border where he just said, this is close enough. And here's the kicker. The line he drew from the south was already nearly 4 miles too far west, and then the one he drew from the north was about 2 miles too far west. So even if he had connected them, they still wouldn't have lined up. Basically, this guy drew 2 broken, crooked lines and then left them unfinished like a toddler building train tracks. And then, to make it worse, nobody checked his work, not a soul. Despite the fact that this was wildly inaccurate and unfinished, the US government, bless its bureaucratic little heart, certified it as the official Texas border in 1891. Just rubber stamped it. Boom, done. Johnny Clark's wonky line was now federal fact. Fast forward to 1910, New Mexico's finally like, wait a second, we got stiffed, when they applied for statehood, and they actually included some language requesting that this extra land be returned. But you know how the saying goes. Possession is 9/10 of the law, especially if you're in Texas and the 10th guy is friends with the president. See, one of the major landowners in this missurveyed strip of land just so happened to be personal friends with President Taft. So when New Mexico tried to reclaim the land, this guy pulled some strings, whispered some sweet nothings into the commander-in-chief's ear, and poof, request was denied. The border stayed. John Clark's awful attempt at geometry became permanent. So, what do we learn from all of this? First, never trust a man who surveys backwards. Second, this is hard proof that you don't need to be good at your job. You just need everyone else to suck at noticing you're bad at it. Third, if your friend is the president, you too can own illegally acquired land with no consequences. And honestly, can we really be mad at Texas? It did what any opportunistic entity would do. Looked at a screw-up, shrugged and said, looks good to me because it's good for me. So yeah, next time you look at a map and admire Texas's sharp edges, remember, that little western bulge, that's not by design, that's basically drunk history. And John H. Clark is the reason why the Lone Star State has a little more booty than it should. Let's talk a little bit about Pecos Bill, the rootin'-tootin' cowboy breastfed king of cowboy folklore, the guy who makes John Wayne look like a yoga instructor with seasonal allergies. According to the legends, and about 100% zero historical documentation, Pecos Bill was born around 1832 in Texas, because of course he was, and like any good cowboy baby, he promptly fell out of a covered wagon near the Pecos River and was left for dead. Parenting, I guess, was a little more casual back then. Now, lucky for young Bill, he was scooped up by a pack of kindly coyotes, who instead of eating him, decided to raise him as one of their own. And by raise, we mean he learned to howl at the moon, chase lizards for snacks, and probably pee on everything in sight. He lived this way for 17 years, sucking down coyote milk and developing the kind of social skills you might expect from someone raised by wild dogs. Eventually, Bill realized he wasn't a canine, though, when he noticed he didn't have a tail and had fewer fleas than his siblings. So he strolled back into human society just before his 18th birthday, half feral, jacked, and probably smelling like coyote arse. Naturally, he decided to become a cowboy because apparently Wild Man with abandonment issues was already taken. Now let's be real for a second. Pecos Bill is not, I repeat, not a real historical figure. Scholars, folklorists, and anyone who's ever taken a high school history class agree that there's no historical prototype for this dude. Voice of America, I enjoy, flatly puts it, Pecos Bill was not a historical person. But let that stop no one. His stories are told like gospel truth, complete with dates, places, and first-person accounts from eyewitnesses, who were probably just people that were drunk around a campfire. In these tales, Bill didn't just live, he reshaped the dang continent. We're talking about feats like digging the entire Rio Grande with his bare hands, just so his cattle could have a watering hole. And because God's work wasn't quite up to spec in his eyes, he allegedly rode wild animals, like most people ride public transit, casually and with a strong sense of superiority. Bears, he tamed them. Mountain lions, he made them his pets. One time he used a live rattlesnake as a lasso, which honestly raises some OSHA concerns in my book, but hey, it was the frontier after all. He was also said to have invented the lasso, the six-shooter, the fence post, the 10-gallon hat, and basically 75% of cowboy fashion and hardware. At this point, if you told me Pecos Bill invented chaps and chili, I'd just nod and accept it. His horse, Widowmaker, was also incredible, and was said to survive on a diet of barbed wire and nitroglycerin, which frankly sounds like a Texas-themed energy drink. And then there's the big one, the story every Billhead knows. One day a tornado came tearing across the plains, and Pecos Bill, instead of ducking for cover like a sane person, lassoed the tornado and rode it. For days. They say the struggle was so fierce it carved the Grand Canyon out of the earth. And when he finally got bucked off the twister, he crash-landed in California so hard that it made Death Valley. That's right. Bill didn't just survive a natural disaster, he suplexed it into geography. Now, as with any great hero, his death was appropriately ridiculous. One version says he died laughing on the sidewalk in Laredo after spotting a Boston tourist wearing a sparkly, over-decorated cowboy hat, probably with rhinestones and tassels and whatever else Easterners think the West looks like. Another version claims he died after eating a meal of barbed wire, trying to impress his horse. That's right, he ate barbed wire. Probably said it tasted like tetanus. Of course, all of this falls into the category of tall tales, the kind of campfire folklore where someone swears their great uncle's cousin once saw Bill arm wrestle a thunderstorm. These stories were originally passed down by actual cowboys, probably after a little too much whiskey and not much sleep, before eventually making it into print. The first written Pecos Bill stories were cooked up in 1923 by journalist Edward J. Tex O'Reilly in the Century magazine. He claimed to have heard these tales from real cowboys, though let's be honest, they probably also told him that rattlesnakes made good belts. A few years later, in 1929, Wisconsin folklorist C.E. Brown, yes, the same guy who helped hype up Paul Bunyan, published Cowboy Tales, Pecos Bill, Tall Yarns of the Mighty Hero. Brown's pamphlet pushed Bill's legend alongside other testosterone-soaked lumberjack myths of the time. Then came James Cloyd Bowman's Pecos Bill, the greatest cowboy of all time, in 1937, a children's novel with illustrations by Laura Bannon, written in the voice of a cowboy narrator who sounds like he's trying to sell you a haunted saddle. The book actually won a Newbery Honor in 1938 and helped lock Bill into the canon of American children's literature, which is a heck of a trajectory for a guy supposedly raised by coyotes. Bill's popularity didn't stop there either. His stories popped up in kids' books, school plays, cartoons, folk music, and even Disney animations. And his appeal isn't just limited to America. Cowboys in Argentina and Australia reportedly picked up on the legend because apparently you don't have to live in Texas to appreciate a man who ropes tornadoes and poops out barbed wire. Today, Pecos Bill is still a mascot of Americana, a symbol of ruggedness, bootstrapping, and probably mild brain damage. He's celebrated in rodeos, libraries, and theme park gift shops. His legend embodies the exaggeration of the myth of the West, the idea that land could be tamed by sheer machismo, elbow grease, and a complete disregard for basic safety. Pecos Bill may not be real, but he's real enough. His stories capture the wild bravado of a frontier that only existed in our dreams, a place where a man could be raised by coyotes, lasso tornadoes, and die laughing at a fancy hat. Let's set the scene for El Muerto, Texas, mid-1800s, a place so wild that even the tumbleweeds carried switchblades. The land was full of settlers, cattle, bandits, and just enough political confusion to make everyone a bit paranoid. Right in the middle of this chilly pot of chaos were the Texas Rangers. The Texas Rangers themselves trace their origins back to 1823, when Stephen F. Austin, charged with settling Anglo-American colonists in what was then Mexican Texas, authorized a small informal corps of men to serve as scouts and intermediaries with indigenous tribes. These early rangers bore little resemblance to later law enforcement agencies. They were frontier auxiliaries, highly mobile and lightly armed, tasked with protecting settlements from raids, guiding travelers through hostile territories, and gathering intelligence on both Native American groups and bandits. That being said, while the Rangers were originally glorified scouts, the Rangers evolved into frontier justice incarnate. By 1840, they were an official thing, answering to the President of the Republic of Texas, armed with rifles, knives, and historical documents suggest massive egos. Their job, keep settlers safe from Native American raids, and crack down on every criminal from horse thieves to highwaymen. If it could steal, cheat, or poop in your water supply, the Rangers had a vendetta against it. But tied into this is that Texas wasn't exactly hunky-dory with the Mexicans that occupied before, because Mexico still wasn't cool with the whole Texas as a republic thing now. They didn't even agree on where Texas ended. Mexico said the border was the Nueces River, while Texas insisted it was the Rio Grande. That stretch of land between the two rivers, it was a lawless, dusty middle finger of terrain known as no man's land. Naturally, both sides treated it like a free-for-all of theft, revenge, and bullets. This mess eventually became the Mexican-American War that ranged from 1846 to 1848, aka Texas yelling, "Mine!" slightly louder than Mexico. And even after this war ended, this no man's land didn't calm down. Bandits roamed it, cattle went missing in it, and Mexicans, who admittedly had more of a right to be there than the Texans back then, were treated like criminals, but I digress. Enter the main characters of this charming little tale. Creed Taylor, a stone-cold Texas Ranger with a name that screams, "shot a man over a card game," and William Alexander Anderson Wallace, better known as Bigfoot, and not the fuzzy forest cryptid, though this guy also stomped through Texas leaving chaos in his wake. Picture a man with enough body hair and testosterone to make a grizzly bear self-conscious. God, maybe he actually is Bigfoot. Regardless, their nemesis, a Mexican outlaw named Vidal, a legendary cattle thief with the slickness of a politician and about as many moral boundaries as one too. Vidal had a habit of waiting until the Rangers were off dealing with the Comanche raids, and then stealing horses from settlements and herding them back into Mexico. It was a sweet gig, until he tried to steal Creed Taylor's prized Mustangs during a raid in 1850. But spoiler alert, Creed wasn't out raiding like Vidal expected. He was home, and he was pissed. So Creed calls up Bigfoot and another local ranger, and the three of them go full Liam Neeson, tracking Vidal and his gang like angry dads looking for the kid who put a dent in their Honda Odyssey. Once they found them, they camped out, and they waited for nightfall, then ended the thieves with Wild West-style efficiency, bullets, blades, and no regrets. Now most folks would stop there, justice served, yeehaw and such. But Creed and Bigfoot weren't just interested in stopping crime. They wanted to make a statement. One that screamed, "Mess with Texas and you'll end up as a ghost story yourself." So they cut off Vidal's head, then they tied his headless corpse to a wild Mustang and stuck his head on the back of the saddle like a grizzly dashboard bobblehead, and they let the horse run loose across the Texas hills in broad daylight. Because nothing says "don't steal my horse ever again" quite like a headless man doing laps on horseback with his own face slapping the tail end. Predictably, this little public service announcement traumatized everybody. Ranchers, cowboys, Mexican locals, indigenous people, they all started reporting sightings of a headless horseman galloping through the desert. This creature became nicknamed El Muerto, or the Dead One, and it was reportedly seen at night, the severed head bouncing behind it like a grotesque lantern. People saw this thing, and of course, thinking it was some sort of demon, they actually fired at it. I mean, heck, I'd probably shoot at that thing too. Who wouldn't shoot at a corpse on horseback? But every time they tried, the legend only grew. Over time, El Muerto went from the dead guy on a horse to a bona fide supernatural terror. Some said seeing him foretold drought, plague, or death. Others thought he was a ghost punishing the greedy. Or maybe just a really committed rancher who refused to quit doing his thing even in the afterlife. Eventually, though, the horse was caught near a watering hole south of Alice, Texas. By that point, poor Vidal's body was riddled with bullets and arrows from natives. He was buried in an unmarked grave. The horse, I presume, needed years of therapy after this. But even though Vidal was buried, this couldn't kill the myth in Texas. Decades later, soldiers in modern-day Uvalde even reported seeing the headless rider gliding through the night. Heck, even into the 1900s, sightings of El Muerto were still pouring in. One 1917 report claimed the El Muerto rode through a camp, head in hand, screaming, "It's mine! It's all mine!" like some sort of demonic landlord collecting rent. To this day, people still claim to see El Muerto. Some say he's transparent now, your classic ghost glow aesthetic. Others just hear hooves at night and don't want to know more. Also, here's a fun fact, El Muerto isn't that unique. The American frontier is crawling with stories like this. Take the Red Ghost, a literal dead man strapped to an abandoned or escaped camel that haunted Arizona. Apparently, the Southwest has a niche market for animal-riding, undead revenge figures. Regardless, El Muerto remains a legend, one born of violence, forged in fear, and kept alive by every cowboy who ever saw something spooky in the deserts of Texas. So here's a UFO story that actually holds up better than your cousin's third marriage. The Lubbock Lights, one of Texas's most compelling mysteries that isn't debatable. It absolutely happened. Also, what makes this one interesting isn't just the lights themselves, but the weird combo of real credibility, clear evidence, and a conclusion so secret it died with the guy who found it, which is honestly peak Project Blue Book stuff. First, let's rewind the tape to August 25th of 1951, around 9:20 p.m. Picture a hot Texas night, a backyard full of professors from Texas Tech University, and the smell of, well, officially tea. But considering these were men of science, I'm going to assume they were either sipping something stronger or breaking down the chemical properties of bourbon for fun. That group included Dr. A.J. Oberg, a chemical engineering professor, Dr. W.L. Ducker, head of petroleum engineering, and Dr. W.I. Robinson, a geology professor and the host of this soiree. Now, these weren't your average yokels squinting at Venus and calling it a UFO. These were sober-ish, highly qualified dudes, and as they sipped whatever was in those cups, they looked up and saw something that made them collectively mesmerized. 2230 bright lights flying overhead. These lights were brighter than stars, bluish-green like a flying smurf, and in a tight U formation. Definitely not meteors, and definitely weird enough to spook three men who spent their days thinking way too much about hydrocarbons. And this didn't happen just once, they saw it again and again. Over the following weeks, they would go on to witness these lights about a dozen times, always traveling from north to south. These sightings weren't confined to our perhaps tipsy trio of tenure either. On that same night, three women elsewhere in Lubbock also reported the lights. An employee of the super-classified Sandia Corporation, yes, the Atomic Energy Commission folks, also spotted these lights from about 350 miles away in New Mexico, and a local rancher and his wife confirmed the same. The professors described the lights as round, fluorescent, bigger than stars but smaller than the moon, like celestial skittles in a way, and they estimated the altitude at around 2,000 feet, assuming the lights passed above a thin cloud. That would put their speed at about 600 miles per hour, roughly the same speed you'd need to leave Texas by car in a day from most cities. Anyways, things got juicier on August 30th. That's when Carl Hart Jr., a Texas Tech freshman and frankly the most stereotypical Texas name possible short of Buckaroo Cactus Man, saw 18 to 20 lights flying around in a V formation. Carl, being a photographer with a Kodak, ran inside to grab his 35mm camera. He came back out, aimed at the sky, and snapped 5 photos of the lights flying overhead. Carl actually took these photos to the Lubbock Avalanche Journal. The editor, funny enough, told him if they were fake, Carl would be in trouble and he'd run him out of town. But the paper bought them for $10 anyways, because nothing screams national UFO sensation like minimum wage and a vague threat. Carl's photos went national. They even reached Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, the home of Project Blue Book, the Air Force's top-secret initiative to explain away weird stuff while sounding as official as possible. Now, let's talk theories, because oh boy, people had them. One of the more solid ones came from a local man in La Mesa. He and his wife saw the lights, and being seasoned Texans with no time for intergalactic nonsense, they actually thought they were plover birds. That's right, birds. The theory goes that the newly installed mercury vapor streetlights in Lubbock reflected off the shiny white bellies of these night-flying birds, giving off the illusion of flying lights. T.E. Snyder, a farmer who actually saw the lights flying over a drive-in movie theater, actually heard plover noises accompanying the lights, which either supports the theory or proves that aliens are better trolls than we thought. Even J. Allen Hynek, the astronomer who later became a big name in UFO debunking before switching teams and kinda believing in them, leaned towards the bird explanation too. Apparently, it was reasonable enough that people started feeling silly about calling the Air Force over a flock of shiny pigeons. But of course, not everyone agreed. J.C. Cross, head of Texas Tech's biology department, and a local game warden said, "Nah, birds can't move that fast, and if they were flying that low, people would have seen actual birds, not just mysterious blobs of light. Unless the birds were in stealth mode, I guess." Also, another theory was the flying wing. That's right, a predecessor to the stealth bomber. The US Air Force actually did have one of these silent triangle-shaped crafts flying around in the area at the time, and it could have been what people saw. Though if you're wondering why the Air Force didn't just say that, remember this is the same government that once thought feeding LSD to dolphins was intriguing science. Now here's where it all collapses into hilarious anticlimax. Project Blue Book investigator Edward J. Ruppelt, who took this case seriously, claimed that someone actually figured it out. A member of the public tracked the phenomenon for months using real instruments and science and all that sexy stuff and figured out exactly what the Lubbock lights were. But then Ruppelt was like, yeah, I promised him anonymity, so I'm just gonna keep that to myself, but seriously, it's real. I'm sorry, what? The man said, and I'm paraphrasing here, "It wasn't birds, it wasn't aliens, but it was something really mundane and totally explainable. I just can't tell you what it is. Sorry, bye. And then he died at age 37 of a heart attack and took the answer with him. That's right, the one guy who knew what the heck happened went to his grave holding the Lubbock Lights like a middle finger from beyond. A real I know something you don't energy. Classic. So here we are. We know people saw something. We have real photographic evidence of something. We have experts saying this something was not normal, and we had a solution to this something. But it died with the guy who had one job and left us with blue balls and blurry photos. Because of this, to this day, nobody really knows what the Lubbock Lights were. Birds, bombers, alien butt cheeks, who knows? But if you're ever in Lubbock and see a glowing V or U up in the sky, snap a pic and send it to me, preferably before the government erases your memory or buys your film for $10. Heck, I'll give you 15 for a proper photo. Because whatever flew over Lubbock that year, it lit up the sky, baffled the brains, and left behind the greatest unsolved case of, oh come on, just tell us, in UFO history. Texans, I had a heck of a time here with ya, and it's exciting to say I've covered every state in the Southeast now at least once. Also, I'm not done with y'all yet, or really ever, but I will briefly be shifting my focus to New England now. Now, if you want to be around when I do cover more of your cities, I'm thinking Galveston, Houston, and everything in between deserves a video. YouTube will let you know if you like, comment, subscribe, and turn on those alerts while you're at it. Seriously, it's free, it's quick, and it lets YouTube know that this is the kind of content you'd like to see more of. As for what's next, as I said, we're going to New England for the summer. But on the way, we're going to be covering the lore of Shenandoah National Park, and we might even mix in some fun Great Lakes lore as we dart around the region. Vermont, you're up at bat though, so get hyped. And remember, most importantly, whether you just saw a man wearing underpants sitting in a tree, or if Bigfoot stole your girlfriend and you saw she turned off her Find My Location, don't you ever forget, it's always story time.